In this lecture, the discussion centers around the legal, political, social, and cultural issues surrounding transgender Americans. And while there are tensions between the cisgender community and the heterosexual community and transgender Americans, there are also divisions and controversies within the LGBT community surrounding this issue of transgenderism. We'll talk more about that, but it is a very complicated topic and the newest sort of challenge to traditional sex and gender constructs that we are used to in our society. When we discuss transgender politics, it's a really good idea to sort of deconstruct some of the concepts and constructs that we have surrounding sexuality. Many of us are familiar with the term concept. It's just basically the definitions surrounding a term. However, constructs are a little bit different in the sense that we use constructs to understand social interpretations of terms and social interpretations of roles that are played in society. The term construct reminds us that certain categories in society did not occur naturally, but they were interpreted by society and roles were created around them. This is the idea around social constructs. It's the idea that we agree on these definitions, and that's really the only thing that makes them real. This often is most easily applied to a construct like gender. If we're differentiating between gender and biological sex. Gender is something we associate with what it means to be man and woman or male and female in society. What types of behaviors do those categories of individuals play out? What do we find acceptable? What are the norms and mores associated with being man and woman? Biological sex, on the other hand, refers to the biological determinants of your physical sex characteristics. This refers to genitalia and hormones and other autonomous functions that happen within the human body. Sexuality is also, or sexual orientation is also a social construct. This refers to the people to whom you are sexually attracted. And there is actually, I should say, some controversy about whether sexual orientation is biological or social in nature. I will leave that actually for another time. But it's really important that we grasp that all of these concepts do get mistaken for one another when they are separate. And moreover, we think of them as being either or. And transgender politics defies that and challenges that. Some of the major controversies that have arisen really in the past decade surrounding transgender individuals, and it becomes more of an issue as more people come to terms with the fact that they do not identify with their biological sex in terms of their gender. They actually feel more appropriate with a different gender identity. Essentially, this has become an issue for people in their use of public accommodations, and some misunderstandings have arisen around what type of people transgender people are and whether or not they're actually just trying to masquerade in themselves into the bathroom of the opposite sex for predatory purposes. So we've seen a lot of laws attempted to be passed surrounding this issue. Another issue relates to, and is probably much more consequential for transgender people, and that is how difficult or easy it is to have your identity papers changed to match the gender that you are identifying as and representing to society. If you're trying to purchase plane tickets or if you get pulled over by a police officer, these types of things can actually be, very inconvenient or extremely dangerous for a transgender individual. So this is one of the things that a lot of laws have attempted tempted to target when they want to liberalize the laws for transgender people, make it easier. And some of the more strict cases around the world require individuals not only to go through legal processes, but to have surgery and maybe even counseling. So this is problematic. Transgender people in sports has also been an issue because there are questions about whether or not transgender women have an unfair advantage over cisgender women in competitions. So, and this has actually come up most recently in South Africa, where the woman is not transgender, but a running competitor there has been disqualified for high levels of testosterone. So it's a very complicated issue that brings up a lot of our sort of assumptions around sex and gender. And finally, there is sometimes a problem with inclusion within the within the LGBT community. They have not always been welcoming of transgender individuals. There is a lot behind this to unpack, and I don't necessarily have room here, but some people feel like that transgender people are just trying to cop out of being gay. The idea of being transgender is not necessarily well understood by lesbians, gays, and bisexuals either. So there's a term that's called trans exclusionary radical feminist, and feminists and lesbian communities have actually struggled with this viewpoint quite a bit. Academically, some other questions arise because of transgender people. The first is, how do we construct our social science and maybe even our medical science to reflect these new realities surrounding gender? We still measure gender in the binary for the most part in social science research, and it's really a matter of just creating new categories. So it's very interesting that the social science, which has many theories about gender, has been really slow when it comes to measurement. How also is sexuality, homophobia, and transphobia and sexism bound up for individuals in the way that they perceive of transgender individuals? That's also an interesting academic question that we've been asked. And then also, obviously, from the political science standpoint, we're interested in how the political and legal processes in society are coping with these changes. So how have we dealt with this legally and politically? And as you see, there have been things like the transgender bathroom bill that have been passed as responses to some of the advances or the awareness raising that transgender people have been attempting. And finally, the passage of hate crime legislation is relevant here too, because it is sort of an acknowledgement by society and the legal structures that transgender people experience intensified violence, considering their population in society. So this information is actually easier viewed within the PowerPoint, but I've given you the link if you want to go check out more information on this. But this is the bathroom bill legislative tracking that kind of walks you through the state's processes. Most of these measures have failed, except for the North Carolina bill, which was sort of tweaked and repassed with a little bit of adjustments. The gist of all of these bills, regardless of the state, is that a person has to use public accommodations when they are sex segregated that match whatever they were assigned at birth. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd hate crimes legislation was passed in 2009 under the Barack Obama administration. But there have been previous iterations of this that go back to 1968 with Lyndon Johnson, that makes it a crime to target people based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. It was actually the 2009 laws that extended hate crimes legislation beyond race and gender to sexual orientation and gender identity. And these create harsher penalties and for targeting someone based on these protected statuses. And some of the select statistics from the victims database that the FBI provides shows that there is a high percentage of hate crimes directed at LGBTQ+ persons. If you look at that figure of around 16% of people, of the victims were targeted because of this, of their sexual orientation. When you consider that LGBT persons are only 3 to 4% of the population, this is actually quite high. And so the select statistics also show really the breakdown of victims based on gender identity and sexual orientation, lesbians, and also gay men. One important thing also to point out here is that the statistics I'm showing at this moment are from 2017. And upcoming, you have the same breakdown of these crimes that have been applied to 2016. And one of the provisions of this legislation is that the FBI has to compile reports about these crimes and present them to the public. In addition, these are the statistics from the year 2016. Coming up, we will look at the statistics from the year 2017. And the FBI usually reports a year behind, so we don't have the 2018 statistics just yet. But all of the indicators seem to point to the fact that hate crimes are increasing and have been steadily increasing since 2015. And not just against transgender individuals, but against people of racial and religious and ethnic minorities as well. So as mentioned, this is comparative data across years, and the increase between 2016 and 2017 is somewhere around 1,500 hate crimes. That's pretty significant in terms of percentage jumps. And the percentage of LGBT persons that are victimized between these 2 years has remained roughly the same. This is really kind of interesting just to, look at how this stuff increases, along with maybe some of the public rhetoric surrounding certain types of people, whether they are LGBTQ persons or whether they are racial or ethnic minorities. Again, though, this only refers to those crimes that are reported. And finally, ending with a little bit of good news, the World Health Organization has removed transgender from the list of mental health disorders. It is still listed as a health disorder in the United States. Homosexuality at one time was also listed as a disorder, and that began to change in the 1970s when it was removed from the physician's desk reference. And this does sort of establish a pattern and the basis for treating people differently. Now, I do want to just mention that there are a few issues I haven't talked about that we will hit upon that include healthcare for transgender individuals and other legal issues surrounding their identity. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.